Okay, good afternoon, just about. Thank you all for coming to this session. This session particularly focuses on digital inclusion. As you will all have heard over the many press releases and the buzz around the GSMA, the MWC today, there's about 3.6 billion unique users of mobile phones today in the world. 2.7 billion of those are in the emerging markets. And over the next 5 years or so till 2020, we're likely to see over 1 billion more people connected to mobile internet. All very big numbers, very impressive numbers, and yet when we look at it and step back a little bit, 60% of the world's population is still without a mobile connection or internet connection. So the GSMA last year in 2014 set up an initiative which is called the Digital Inclusion Initiative, and it particularly focuses on identifying the barriers and the opportunities that we will need to address as mobile industry, as governments, as ecosystem partners, as development sector, to try and overcome these issues so that the next billion can actually be connected. And today what we will try and do is get our panel of experts who are all very, very informed in their own areas of expertise to try and tell us a little bit about that. We'd see if any of it can be taken forward. And we've got a couple more sessions during the rest of the week, and we see how that resonates with the rest of it. In particular, what we are looking at is issues around network infrastructure and policy, pricing, availability of spectrum. We're looking at affordability and taxation, both in terms of the handset pricing, the taxes and levies around the connection itself. We're looking at literacy and digital skills for a lot of these people. When you get to them, they may actually now have a mobile connection, but they perhaps not have some of the other skills, perhaps some of the other products and services that we have access to in the developed world. And also what we will look at is content, local content, and more importantly, relevant local content in the right languages that can be received in the right way by the people who are being connected at that stage. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel of speakers. Right at the far end, we've got David Strisani, who's Assistant Director for Deloitte Economic Consulting. Next to that is Ross Cormack, CEO of Ooredoo Myanmar, perhaps one of the more interesting, exciting markets at the moment. Next to that, we have Sonia George, who is Executive Director, Alliance for Affordable Internet. And we have Dion Gerling, founder of Connect Africa. So welcome all, and thank you for your time on this panel. What I would like to be able to do is start off with a couple of questions. And perhaps, Sonia, if I can ask you a question. That universal access to mobile broadband is a realistic goal in today's world?
I certainly want to hope that it is. That's exactly why we are here, and that's exactly what we, as the Alliance for Affordable Internet, really aim to and work for. However, it doesn't come without challenges. And the reality that we face, as you mentioned, is that a reality where 60% of the population is still not connected. But worse than that is a reality where a very large percentage of that population also lives under the poverty line and in situations that are very complicated to actually make internet and mobile broadband affordable. And so I certainly hope that we can achieve that goal, but we have to work together in a collaborative way to make sure that we get there. We need to think about the 2 billion people that live under the poverty line in developing countries that cannot and are very far from ever being able to afford right now in the current conditions. And we also need to think about women and rural populations that are also being set aside in the digital age because of income issues, because of socioeconomic conditions that also limit their access. And so it's important that we not only think about those next billion that you just mentioned, but we think of the entirety of the 4 billion that deserve just the same kind of access as we have now. And so we, as the Alliance for Affordable Internet, believe that that's possible by working together with all of you, and especially for us by focusing on the kind of reform at the policy and regulatory levels that will reduce the overall cost of providing services and hopefully then lead us to a much more affordable service. But of course, as you know, affordable service is not just about the connectivity. It also means affordable devices. It means quality connections, quality infrastructure, of the kinds of things that I'm sure we're going to hear here today, so that it's not just the idea of the potential mobile internet connectivity that we have, but one that allows folks such as those that I was just mentioning, especially the poor, women and rural dwellers, that can benefit from the opportunities that we all envision possible for them. And that's what digital inclusion is about. So it's a goal that we all have, but it's a goal that certainly comes with enormous challenges. And we are working together for that. So I believe it's possible.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit about the government policies. What do you think are the most effective policies with relevance to what you just said?
Mm-hmm. There's a number of them. I take the opportunity, if you don't mind, to say that we're actually launching our affordability report on Wednesday here at Mobile World Congress at the Ericsson booth. And so you all invited to come. And hopefully you can learn also a bit more about our research and how we see it taking shape in terms of how do we assess countries as far as what they have to do and what they've done so far to lead to an affordable outcome. But some of the policies that I can highlight are such things as having a very well-defined national policy, not just for broadband and a specific and comprehensive broadband plan, but also having what we call in some regions digital agendas that not only are very clear in terms of the goals and targets that they're trying to achieve, but they are comprehensive in bringing together not just supply needs in the sector in terms of providing the infrastructure and what you have to be able to provide the access, but actually creating the conditions so that the demand also exists and so that users can benefit from that infrastructure. So it has to come with both a supply and demand perspective, and it's very important to have that guidance at the national level. So that's one important policy step that we are working very closely with some governments to support, is to ensure that the vision at the higher level is clear. And then, of course, that vision trickles down in very concrete regulatory steps and regulatory instruments that allow for that vision to be implemented. So a vision where such things as infrastructure sharing is possible, infrastructure sharing is incentivized, and that operators, service providers can see it as not only an opportunity, but really the right way to go about providing services, especially to be able to reach those who need to have much, much, much more affordable service levels. There are many others that we actually highlight in our research, and I can go over a few of them, a few more if you'd like. One more that I would like to mention, which I think it's particularly relevant to digital inclusion, is having very clear plans at the national level within the policy, but also at the regulatory level for a sense of a collective commitment from all of the players in the sector, in the countries, and in the regions to contribute to universal access, to equal universal access in our sector, not just through much more effective uses of universal service funds, but also to have much more innovative approaches to coming together and invest collectively in the kinds of not just infrastructure, but in the kinds of programs that we would like to see to create the demand, stimulate the demand, but at the same time provide the opportunities that we again envision from that the internet and mobile broadband specifically can provide to populations. So if you can't have obviously an affordable connection or a device that allows you to have access to health information, education information, agriculture, etc., then you really are set aside and not able to benefit. So it's not just one single decision, but it's really a package of different pieces of a larger puzzle that policy and regulation can support to make sure that it becomes possible. I can share a few more as we continue the discussion.
Thank you.
So I don't take over.
Ross, you are, as I said earlier, probably in one of the most interesting and exciting markets at the moment. What is your perspective on that? What do you think governments should be doing in terms of incentivizing operators and also in terms of what they should be doing in terms of the local ecosystem? Your perspectives, please. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's a huge privilege to be in Myanmar at this time. You feel the excitement. Actually, there's no shortage of demand, which was incredible. We actually met the millionth customer after 3 weeks.
Wonderful.
So demand was there, but facilitating that demand and delivering the supply side is really a challenge. The government, in our case, actually set up the regulatory framework to make the spectrum available and to encourage sharing, actually passive sharing of infrastructure, whether fiber or towers, right from the get-go. So that encouragement was there. The facilitation was there. But actually, it's been quite difficult because it's the first time anybody's done all this, especially in a competitive framework. Nevertheless, if we step back to the higher level and address, I think, some of the same things you were saying, Sonia, in terms of the sharing, I think it would be very important to encourage active sharing, not just passive sharing. The whole thing is to get the coverage out there for as many people as possible, as soon as possible. So by active sharing instead of just passive sharing, you actually get the faster build out and the access. You need fiber. You need to get the connectivity because, of course, nobody in the new world wants the old world solution. So they want data, what we in this room call data, what they call Facebook, internet, whatever. And they want it now. And they want it with smartphones. So that's another thing you touched on, I think, affordability of smartphones. With the lowest cost that we've actually taken to market is about $37 for actually something that looks remarkably like my expensive toys there, and does a lot of that. And we're getting down to $25 soon, and probably sub $20, and that helps a lot too. But I think encouraging us to build as fast as possible means lower cost for spectrum. I think that's very important. The government rights of way to make those freely available at the sides of highways and elsewhere to build the fiber as quickly as possible. For those who've done this, you have to get permission for every new owner where you're passing. And it can take months, even years, to get your routes, and you have to change your routes and all the rest of it. If you can get government approval to go ahead, that can help build as soon as possible as well. I think the other aspects really are to do with things like the USF, which you touched on, Sonia. Making the USF really work. A lot of countries collect USFs without actually ever using them. So in fact, if the regulator can really focus on saying, this is your portion of USF, you have to give it to me or build it and demonstrate how you're going to build it as fast as possible. So you can see in the answer so far, I've dealt much more with how to get it out there, how to get the coverage, how to get the connectivity, and you mentioned quality. We need international access. We need to get access to submarine fiber cables. We need to have equal access. You know, the traditional monopoly operator is always incredibly strong. Many of us have played the roles on the other side of the defender of the monopoly. It's actually very easy to do. So governments need to do really much more to name and shame those involved in slowing things up by making it a win-win. I mean, you don't just punish, you do it in a positive way, right? Turn it into a win-win-win. So I think there's a lot governments can do. I think it's very exciting. Honestly, I'm just thrilled to be where I am today, just watching, you know, the change that's happening as people get these smartphones in their hands.
Excellent. I'm sure it's very, very exciting. I am going to turn to another very exciting market, Dion, for yourself. And, you know, what do you think are the technical innovations that can support rural connectivity, such as in Africa? And I'm sure it'll apply to the other regions as well.
Well, I think, thanks very much for letting me be here. But the development in technology in the last 3 years has been staggering. I remember last year, even at Mobile World Congress, struggling to get into some of the big vendor booths here and being pushed into hall number 8A and 8B and seeing guys running networks off laptops. You know, to see that kind of innovation is remarkable. Its applications for rural Africa in particular is exciting. You know, we're trying to work with operators to get into rural areas. We've tested various technologies. We're working with several of the light BTS solutions. There's now some ultralight BTS solutions that we're about to launch in Zambia on a trial basis. One of which hopefully will be with the government and the regulator. These have worked very effectively. I think there's a wonderful project out in Mexico run by, I think, Rizomatica is the firm, where they've connected up communities, local call routing, at a fixed price per month. This is a game changer because $2 or $4 per month, and you have unlimited calls within your own community, changes people's lives, yep. Enables them to do more than they would normally be able to do without having to go back home to meet anybody that they need to. The interconnects into the operators is, of course, the next step, and working with the operators is really the challenge that we're facing. Introducing a ultra lightweight solution that might not be type approved yet is a challenge. The operators are not comfortable with that. The larger vendors are not comfortable with that. So we're fighting a war at a very high level. As a small company, it doesn't make us as successful as we would like to be. Mm. So it's very interesting to hear an operator talk about active sharing. That is really where we're coming from. We can make a business model work on active and passive infrastructure on a $2 to $4 ARPU. Mm-hmm. That now is only really possible with a company that doesn't have the overhead or the margin requirements that the larger operators require. We can do that only because of the new technologies that have evolved. Mm-hmm. The problem is interacting or interconnecting with the operators, and we look at all sorts of business models, revenue sharing, lease agreements. There's a trend now with tower companies taking over infrastructure on fixed leases. We can look at all of those, but we do stumble at the operators. So the sooner you can come to Africa, the better. But the technology is certainly there. Yeah. It's the commercials where we is the challenge.
Okay, very good. David, I didn't want to leave you out there, but what is how do you see the cost of connectivity as a barrier in low-income markets?
Well, the reason why the cost of connectivity is such a high barrier is simply because the 4 billion unconnected live in countries where the incomes are very low, but also where income inequality is particularly strong. So what happens there is that you have, it simply becomes impossible for a lot of people, not so much to actually buy minutes and megabytes. The operators have done a great job in actually offering these services very cheaply. It's the cost of the handset, it's the device. That is the biggest barrier. I'll give you an example. We've just done a piece of work for the GSMA looking at digital inclusion in Bangladesh. And the average wage in Bangladesh is monthly wage is $90. And even though the operators can sell a smartphone for $30, $50, this is just an average wage. There's still pockets of population, and in Bangladesh we're talking millions and millions of people that earn much less than that. So how can you really buy a smartphone when it's pretty much your monthly wage? It requires a massive investment. And I think a very important thing that is still proving a big barrier for connectivity in developing markets is the role of taxation. A key component of prices in mobile is still given by tax. I take the opportunity to also mention a study that with the GSMA we're launching here in Barcelona, and it looks at mobile-specific taxation on mobile services. We've just surveyed 110 countries worldwide, and we found that 44 countries tax mobile services much more than normal goods and services. And these are all emerging markets, which is a bit counterintuitive because typically governments tax more goods like alcohol or tobacco that they want to disincentivize the use. But goods like mobile services that deliver so many extra benefits, such as healthcare, education, in particular in emerging markets, should somehow be incentivized, not disincentivized. And what we found, interestingly, is that in these 44 countries, consumers pay up to one-third, actually on average, one-third more in tax than they pay for normal goods and services. So it's quite a significant extra cost, and that really adds to the price, and it really acts as a barrier. Now, it is recognized that in these countries, the mobile operators are a key contributor to the government tax revenues, and I don't think the mobile operators want to argue for no taxation. But there is a way forward to actually to lower the barriers and increase digital inclusion, which is to transition to a stage where perhaps mobile is treated equally to other goods and services, which seems a fairly sensible approach, recognizing the importance of mobile to tax revenue. So that would be a first step. And as Ross was saying, when we've studied these instances where taxation has decreased, the government has actually benefited a lot more because the user base increases so quickly that actually they end up in 2 or 3 years earning a lot more taxes than they would have had if they'd kept the taxes as high as they had at the start. And we are releasing with the GSMA a number of studies. One we've just released in Tanzania. And we found by building a macroeconomic model of the Tanzanian economy that if they decrease the mobile-specific taxes that they have in Tanzania, and Tanzania is the highest in Africa. So on top of VAT, you have another 17% in tax that just applies to mobile, which is, if you think about it, incredibly high. It's much more than double the VAT that applies to normal goods and services in Tanzania. Well, what we found is that because of the positive effect that that would have on pricing, actually the government could be tax neutral within 2 or 3 years, while at the same time delivering a lot more digital inclusion, another 2 million connections in 3 years, with the ability to actually access services such as healthcare, education, which in the long term further decreases the cost of delivery for governments. So there is a key role that governments can have here, and it's all about really recognizing the long-term potential versus the short-term benefits of high taxation. But it's really important, I think, to stress that in some countries, mobile is still treated a little bit as a luxury good, particularly with smartphones and devices. And when you think of all the opportunities that you were mentioning around inclusion at so many levels, income, education, gender, it really isn't a luxury good. It's actually something that people should try, and governments should try to promote.
Yes, Sonia.
Thank you for that, David. I was just going to add. Can you hear? Yeah. I was just going to add that we were just in the Dominican Republic this past week working with our coalition there. A4AI, we worked by establishing a national coalition of the multiple stakeholders in the sector, public, private, and civil society organizations. And as the stakeholders were selecting and working together to prioritize the areas that we're going to tackle with them, one of the areas was precisely taxation, which we're also working in other countries. But one of the things that was very clear in the Dominican Republic was that the stakeholders all believed very strongly, and there was no distinction between, private, public, or civil society organizations, was that they felt that there was a need for the government to, in their policy, in their legislation, to recognize the role of the internet as a public good. And once you have the internet recognized as a public good, then more likely they can make the arguments and link the arguments of taxation and other kinds of other policy change with other government sectors, because they felt that, and it's true, it's what we have to deal with in many circumstances, is that despite the fact that I'm sure all of us here in this room understand very well the benefit of the internet and mobile broadband for development purposes, the reality is that that is still being questioned, and it's questioned by ministers of finance that have great demands to increase their budgets, by ministries of even health and education who are struggling for more of their budgets to be, of the national budget to be allocated to their particular sectors. So it's important that we continue to make that case very strongly, not just as a sector, but as stakeholders. All of us have a very important vested interest in doing that, because it allows us to also make better policy and link the importance of those kinds of policy decisions at fiscal level, at education level, etc., with the outcomes that we want to achieve. And that was very clear to the stakeholders. And so we agreed to work together on that with them, which to me was a really important step. And it reflects exactly the kind of vision of digital inclusion that we have, but one that is really grounded on the understanding of what the benefits can be at different levels for the country.
Listening to this, I'm delighted and also petrified, because I see how long is this going to take? When you start talking about governments and they haven't even decided whether this is a human right or not, and we're ready to go. You know, the technology is there. You've got forward-thinking operators. You know, it can be done virtually overnight. You know, we have a team that we've partnered with, a tower engineering company who can deploy 200 towers in 6 months. You know, these things are possible, and it's very, very frustrating to sit there and not be able to do it. The money's there, the technology's there, the demand, the clients are there, but it's not happening.
So what you are all sort of identifying is something very key, and I've been launching networks for many, many years now, and it's surprising to realize that people, governments in particular, still view access to mobile internet or mobile phones as a luxury. And I think that's a very fundamental thing that you've all identified. And I'd love to explore that a little bit more and how that view can be changed a little bit.
You know, in our case, there is a taxation, import tax on smartphones. And in fact, when you add up the total taxes of import and everything else, it's 17%.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what everybody's been, you know, we're in violent agreement that actually it's in a vast positive benefit to the government to actually get rid of that and accelerate the import of this. Now, the porous borders of our country happen to help us in this regard because we border with China and with India, so a lot of lower cost handsets come in, goodness knows how. So that helps. But actually, the other side to this equation is to try and emphasize in reality how we can help the government in doing the other things. So we team with, you know, NGOs, much the same as you were just saying actually, Dion, with the tower companies, with NGOs in health, for instance. So we're building some trucks at the moment to go out into villages that have never seen any visitor to come and look after these guys. And we're doing this together with the Ministry of Health, to demonstrate that it can be done, and also to leave behind a sustainable solution to remote diagnostics in this case, plus they have a doctor on board who can do sort of examinations. We're trying to do the same with education. We're sponsoring education. We're using telecoms as a platform for monastic schools and this sort of thing. So in this way, demonstrating actually governments pay attention, because this actually does really work. It does play through to all the things that you're trying to do for your people.
Yeah.
And I can share a recent experience that we had in Ghana, where, you know, our coalition actually worked very hard to advocate for the elimination of the import tax, and we were successful. A 20% import tax on smartphones in Ghana was eliminated, and that's exactly the kind of change that you want to see, because you see the direct impact. But to your question, Dion, about why governments take a long time, or are they taking too long? It's true that they do take long, like any government, not just in a developing world, to make change and to change their policy. But it's certainly possible. And one of the things that we can see already through the work of A4AI is that when you integrate and work together with government and all of the stakeholders at the same time, you build the kind of trust and the kind of consensus while you're building your proposals for change. And that goes a long way, because if you do it separately, you're constantly trying to make the case for one or the other. So if you are a small operator or a small provider, you're making the case in your own particular segment. But if you're not working directly with all of the stakeholders to see that benefit, then it takes a lot longer to get to your ultimate objective. And so our approach of not only a multi-stakeholder approach, but very much a coalition that works together on very concrete objectives. What are our priorities to change? In some cases, infrastructure sharing, taxation, spectrum, what have you. I mean, it's decided by the countries. It's precisely because with that support and that work, that collaboration, you can push faster. And the government is a key player in that process. So the government is included in that process, and by the time policy change is taking place and it needs to be approved at that level, the government already has been briefed about it. There's no questions asked. There shouldn't be. If there are, then we didn't do a good job. But if we did the right job, then all the questions should have been addressed. And so the recommendation should already reflect those kinds of concerns. And it's the case on the technology side. That's why you need that kind of change to allow for the innovation to take place.
The issue of USF was brought up, I think, yourself, Ross, and I've worked with a lot of USF organizations in my time. And you're right, it's collected for the sake of being collected. And it's very rarely that you see it being deployed back out. And what do you think, the ecosystem should be doing in that case? What is possible to do with the USF fund if there weren't any restrictions on it? Your view, Ross?
Well, I mean, I think it should be doing what it says it does on the tin. But it normally gets captured by the Ministry of Finance in the country. So in fact, the regulatory authority has the same view that we have. So somehow you need to connect that together. What could we be doing with it? Well, I think just, as I said before, connectivity in all its forms needs to be as broad as possible. And it's got to be high bandwidth connectivity, because people need the future solution today.
David, in your research, have you come across other examples of deployment of USF?
Yeah, well, we've looked at not just at consumer taxation, but also at taxation of mobile operators. And again, it was interesting to find that not just on consumer side, mobile is taxed more than other goods and services, but also on the operator side. And obviously, a key component is spectrum. But through USF charges, we found examples. For example, in Bangladesh, taxation can represent up to 58% of the operator's revenues, which is a lot more than people would expect. And if you think about the investment needs of operators that would then benefit and connect a lot more people, it seems a bit crazy. It's a very high number, and certainly not one that incentivizes investment and foreign direct investment in the country. I think in answer to your question on USF, it really varies by the level of development of countries. There are operators that are trying to really get the government to sit down and actually agree how to spend practically these USF. And in your case, it may be building more towers. In other countries, we are now at a stage where perhaps proposals that work consist more of focusing on connecting hospitals or schools and really giving a clear number. So it's no longer about towers in a lot of countries. Coverage is sort of there. But it's around showing that connecting universities, schools, large commercial centers, in a sense, can be really viable for both. And we were talking about earlier how do we convince government, and it's really about showing the numbers. Ultimately, it's about the money, especially as taxes are determined by the Minister of Finance, not so much by the Minister of Telecommunication. And it's something that it is very important. People tend to engage within the industry where the case is made, but it's about convincing the Ministers of Finance that this is convenient for them too. And there's a lot more positive examples. Kenya is a great one. 5 years ago, they removed, first country in Africa, they removed all taxes on handsets. Penetration went from 20% to 70% within 3 years. The difference in price was so massive just as a result of the abolition of taxation, and then created a lot more revenues for the governments. M-Pesa in Kenya, in Tanzania, massive success, bringing financial services to the previously unbanked. That also creates a lot more revenues for governments. And we have seen in our study some countries that have recognized that actually mobile should be incentivized, and they are taxing it less than other countries. And this is a good way forward. And I think there's a lot more of these examples. And a little bit in developing countries, there is a little bit of competition of governments wanting to do better than others. And I think that's a powerful way, showing these examples and showing
I know both
the benefits.
These people here dying to say something. Sonia, why don't you go first?
Absolutely agree. Taxation needs to be reduced. It's a huge cost. In some countries, it's prohibitive. but USFs are not a tax. Okay, let's clarify
There are
that.
a few, yes.
USF contributions, meaning for those who don't know, contributions to universal service funds are not a tax on the sector. It's a collective contribution that the sector does to address imbalances that the market on its own cannot address. Competition is by far the first step, yes, the first route to go. But it's not enough, and it has proven, unfortunately, and here we are at the GSMA Mobile World Congress, that competition alone is just simply not enough, and that's why we have 60% of the population unconnected. So it's not just about opening competition and magic will happen. We need to do more, and this is why we think we have to think about it from a public policy perspective. It's not just a policy, it's a policy that combines incentives to grow the sector, while at the same time recognizing that we're talking about a public service that is important for the development of countries. So it is not a tax, and that, I have to say, is the most important thing to clarify here and everywhere in any discussion with the sector. It is really a collective responsibility that everyone needs to take to make sure that funds get then used not just for infrastructure, which are some good examples, but primarily for digital literacy, to create awareness of the opportunities, to even support the development of local entrepreneurs that will develop new content and content in the languages appropriate for the context of people's lives. That's why those funds exist. It's not to tax the sector.
Okay.
There's some very interesting points made, actually, but I'm not sure how the operators would feel about it not being a tax. It's a very expensive levy as far as the ISPs and operators are concerned.
It's only 1 or 2%.
Yeah, well, it can be more. But I think the USF as a concept is fantastic. The reality, however, is it's not being spent in many cases. It's worth much more on Treasury's bottom line than it is out in the field trying to gain some return over 10 years. But when it is spent, it's not thought through. The operators play a fundamental role in its use. And what's happening is infrastructure or initiatives, education initiatives and so on are being done, but nobody's thinking about the sustainability of these. And one of the challenges facing Zambia in particular is a universal service fund that has deployed a tremendous network, nearly 200 sites. But there's a problem in the OPEX. Who's going to maintain these sites? Was it the right equipment that was deployed? Who's going to manage it? The operators didn't want to go in there in the first place. Now they're pushing back on running it, and ultimately they're not running effectively, and the community is not benefiting.
It comes down to the commercial viability of it.
Indeed. Yeah. So it's very, very important that's taken through and thought through to the end, because again, Africa's not covered geographically, and that's the big challenge. But it's a huge cost for very little return. Some of the poorest people in the world, huge geographical areas, and a complete rethink of the mobile model. But it's possible. Yeah. It is there.
I'm going to stop you guys there for a moment. I know I have some wonderful questions as well, but we've 10 minutes to go, and I thought we would open this up to the audience and let them ask a few questions as well. The lady over there. Is there a microphone available? That's for us.
Thank you very much. I'm Anara Simpson from San Francisco, and the question I have for you is, Africa is not covered geographically. So what are your thoughts on things like Project Loon and other things like that? Will that make a difference?
I think they're wonderful. Look, I think it's they've been criticised for being pie in the sky, but what they're doing is they're pushing boundaries to the nth degree. And you aim for the stars, you reach the moon. But if you aim for the moon, you only get the clouds. So I think it's a fantastic way to really force people to think and think out of the box. And it will work in certain areas. Governments might have something to say about this eye in the sky, but the concept is great. Universal access that it can provide is tremendous. So keep doing it, guys. Go for it.
More questions? Yes, over here.
Hi, I'm Candice from South Africa. Most of the stuff you've mentioned we are experiencing in South Africa, but I think the one thing I'm very interested in is the barrier with the smartphones. In your research, has there been any governments that actually incentivize smartphones for the population?
First of all, thank you for the two women that stood up, because in the world of men in GSMA's Mobile World Congress, thank you to all of you. I'm the only one on this panel and the next panel, so more of you, please join. But yes, unfortunately, not too many governments have done it, and it's one of the sad realities of, for example, e-government programs. We're really pushing, and it's a very important way in which governments can not only stimulate the demand and grow the sector and increase awareness, but unfortunately governments are not really providing the right services while they are pushing for the whole e-government agenda. So, there's one area that should be worked, and better services should be provided. But yes, you're right. Is that happening or not at the same time as smartphones are being provided? No, there's no particular coordinated strategy, but that is precisely why some of the things that many of us have been mentioning on the panel are important, because to make those services possible through e-government, e-services that governments want to provide, if you don't have a smartphone, is much more complicated. There's only so far you can go with even a very good feature phone to be able to get, to pay your taxes, to get health information, to get education, to register your kids for school, etc. And the kind of flexibility, the kind of benefit, and that you can get from a smartphone is important. And that's why they need to see the connection between taxation and services, the connection between prices of devices, and the ability of really pushing, also from a policy perspective, supporting manufacturing of low-cost devices so that they can become more available and widely distributed, and then those kinds of services can also become more possible. But right now, you're absolutely right. There's a disconnect, and there's not too many governments that are linking those.
I think it's a really good question, because what you're talking about is really how to, I was talking about reach with the network, and you're really talking about, okay, reach on the other side, which is really important. When we're looking, around my management table at stuff that we can do, we actually say, what do we really need government help for, and what can we get on and do ourselves? And on this one, I'd love the government to come in with subsidies, but I just kind of know it's never going to happen. So what we try and do is lobby for taxes, as Davide was talking about, but also we encourage the manufacturers to come and visit the country. So we've brought Singapore, Chinese, and other manufacturers to come and look at Myanmar. We've told them what our strategy is, and we've said, look, if you price at this price, we reckon we can sell X of your phones together. So that's how we've done something within our gift, rather than what we can get from government, and others have said it around here, is a reduction in taxes on import, or at least tax waivers on short term. So that's what I'd rather they focused on, because I think we can get the manufacturers and us to get the lower cost handset. Oh, the last part of it was we work with microfinance companies as well. We also do reverse subsidies, so that we minimize the cost of acquisition, right, for them, the amount that they have to shell out at the point of sale. So just to help people ease themselves into it. And actually, if I may, we have 65% women in our company. Just
one more question, and it's from a woman again. So. I'm sure everybody has a lot to say. We've got 5 minutes, so I'll give you 1 minute each.
I have to declare a conflict here. I wrote last year's report that Zuckerberg launched at GSMA, so I may be a bit biased. But I think the good message that, or the good thing that Zuckerberg is providing here is really raising attention and is really raising the profile of the debate. Whether everybody agrees that broadband or internet is a public good, and therefore the implications of that is a different story, but it's certainly helping to raise attention. And it is also highlighted that there is a demand out there obviously for Facebook, but not just for Facebook, and that demand is not being served currently. And I think it's a key result in very little time that is achieved.
Ross?
I mean, there are all sorts of big picture stuff to pick on it, but if I just stay at actually the utility level, in our market, the biggest search engine is Facebook. I mean, unbelievably. People go into Facebook and then break out of Facebook to go elsewhere, so it's a bit wacko. But on the other hand, it's the way people want to do it, so therefore it's right. And since we launched, the number of Facebook customers has doubled. So it adds something to their lives, and what we've been able to do is to reach out and make it available to more people. We also provided it for free ourselves at launch to get traction in the market. So, you know, the social networking is terribly powerful in a country which has actually come out of a period of isolation, let's say. So that people for the very first time can actually confer and agree among themselves, and it's given people power.
Sonia?
I'll just say that I think it would be really wonderful to hear from Facebook and from Mark tonight, perhaps some evidence and some research on the impact that we can already see from zero-rated services and internet.org app applications in different countries. There's great opportunities, and the more we can hear about, the more we can all learn and understand the potential benefit, not just right away to those who can access now, but to the many more that we've been talking about that should have as many opportunities as there are possible to have access to the internet.
And I think it's ultimately going to boil down to the infrastructure and literacy from the African perspective anyway. You know, the folks in rural areas in Africa are not literate, and that's a problem for a Facebook type service. Having said that, however, well, I really welcome the OTT players. These guys are raising the debate. It's the Google balloon. It's the sort of drones that Facebook is talking about as well. These are fun and exciting things, and Facebook is hugely popular in Africa. It's only a matter of time before it will filter into the rural areas, and it'll bring education with it. So education is the answer for Africa, and these guys can help.
Very good. Thank you so much for your participation, everybody, and wonderful debate. I'm sure if we get another hour, we'll continue, but unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you all for listening and for your questions.